Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I want to wish a very happy heavenly birthday to my TV dad, Ralph Waite. So I hope that you'll join me in celebrating Ralph in this segment. In Goodnight John Boy, Earl Hamner talks about the casting of Ralph Waite as John Walton. Ralph Waite was signed to play the father. Ralph took an interesting road on his way to becoming an actor. After earning his BA at Bushnell University, Ralph became a social caseworker in New York's Westchester County. Following that, he spent 3 years at the Yale School of Divinity, where he was a practicing Presbyterian minister. He left the ministry to take a job as religious editor at the publishing firm of Harper and Row, and finally he found his true calling, acting. His 1965 role in the play Hogan's Goat was to become the true beginning of his lifelong career. In a speech, I once said that actors have rich gifts to give, and that Ralph Waite gave me a precious gift in his portrayal of the role inspired by my father, John Walton. Ralph was the oldest of 5 children, and just after his passing, the Jamestown Sun wrote an article that included information about Ralph. It said he served in World War II, he was in the Marine Corps, and was an ordained Presbyterian minister. He's best known for the role of John Walton Sr. on the CBS drama about rural Appalachian life during the Great Depression. He was the best client and a fantastic human being, Waite's manager, Susan Zachary, said, adding that the actor died in Palm Desert, California, where he lived. Waite, who left religion for about 50 years before rediscovering it again in 2010, was born in 1928 in White Plains, New York. He worked in publishing early in his career before moving on to acting. One of his first film roles was a small part as the character Alibi in the 1967 Paul Newman film Cool Hand Luke. Not a bad way to start your film career. I love the diversity of the roles that Ralph played over the course of his standout career. From, of course, playing a wonderful father figure in the Waltons and also on NCIS, and then playing a really nasty slave owner in the miniseries Roots. Of course, other films where we had the chance to see his beautiful work in Cliffhanger and in The Bodyguard with Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston. And then he had his own series once again with Mississippi, where he was on the river as a riverboat captain. His film On the Nickel was one that was very near and dear to him, and he basically financed the film himself. I think he did it in the later seasons of the Waltons, between seasons, and one of the other actors in it was longtime friend Hal Williams, who of course played Harley on the Waltons. And he wrote it, he directed it, and he also played a role in it, a very hard-hitting, moving film. Unfortunately, I don't even know if it's around any place to be able to see it anymore, but we were able to catch a screening of it that Ralph had after he made it. And we were also very proud of him. With his lifelong love of theater, he was the founder of the LA Actors Theater and, again, put a lot of his own money into that theater company. He was an active member of Spirit of the Desert Presbyterian Fellowship in Palm Desert, California. And just before his death, he attended the book signing of Mary McDonough, of course, who played Erin Walton, and her first book. And it was a wonderful sort of gathering, and all of us cast who were in the LA area came out to help celebrate the release of her book. And Ralph was there and Michael was there. And it was a very special day for Mary, and I'm sure it meant a lot to her that all of us, and particularly Ralph, came to support her. How would you categorize the relationship between Erin and Daddy, like as it over the course of the seasons?
I think that my relationship with my own dad just transferred right into how I played Erin with Daddy. Because I looked up to Ralph, and although Ralph was a lot funnier than my dad had humor, but not like Ralph. My dad didn't sing at the table. and crack off-color jokes. But I think that Erin's relationship and how I looked at him was similar to how I felt and related to my own dad, especially when my dad died. So that really, when I had scenes with Ralph, like the scene where I was trying to decide between Ashley and Paul, and I had these heartfelt moments, or Erin did, with Ralph, I always remember thinking, like, what would my dad have told me? And I just sort of transferred all of that to Ralph and Daddy, and what Daddy, the advice that he gave me, and how he would lead me to decide for myself which Ashley or Paul was better and why. And that kind of wisdom, because I missed my dad so much. And so I feel, and then even after the show was over, I kept up that kind of relationship with Ralph. When he was in New York and I was there, I would always go see him. I don't know if, I guess I can say this now, but we smoked cigars together. And I would bring the cigars.
One of our viewers here on my channel commented that there seemed to be a very special relationship between Elizabeth and Daddy, especially in the early seasons when she was often found sitting on his lap and him having special interactions with her. So, and they had asked if I might ask Kami about that relationship between her and Ralph. And so recently when I was talking with Kami, we touched on this subject, and here is what she had to share about that relationship, and also us both talking just about Ralph and what it was like interacting with him and having him play our father. Because I was asked about this, the relationship between Elizabeth and John and you know, Daddy. And, you know, this viewer felt that there was just a real, seemed to be a special thing that was created, and I hadn't necessarily put a lot of attention on it. There was just a lot of really sweet scenes, and there always seemed to be a really comfortable relationship there. What was your take on it?
I know I've been thinking about it because people have mentioned it before to me too. Like, were you and Ralph really close? Because it just seemed like such a tight relationship. And I would say, honestly, I was close to Michael. Rather than Ralph. Though that said, when I think about it, like Ralph's portrayal of John has a lot in common with my dad. Right? Like my dad is a hugger and a, you know, really warm kind of dad who would totally like pull you on your lap and explain things to you. And so that could have been part of what people were picking up on. Like the way Ralph embodied John felt very comfortable to me. Like, you know, like reading funny, like just all of the stuff that he did is what I experienced at home with my dad. So I think that could be part of it. Because when I think about Ralph, like from a Kami to Ralph lens, like Ralph was a serious New York actor, right? And so I think he took some of the acting stuff more seriously than I did, because I just saw it as like, oh, you hit your mark and you remember your line and off you go. And he was really, there were definitely times on set where he was like kind of fighting for authenticity, and he would get upset sometimes, you know, like we should be eating more. We're a hungry family just coming in from like working on the mill, and I was like, but but it doesn't taste good. So why would I eat more?
Yeah, it was interesting because what you said about his portrayal of John and how he embodied that character and the way he recognized what that relationship as a father needed to be with his children was the reason why everyone wanted him, you know, John Walton to be their dad, you know, the authenticity that he created of being a father. I think we all felt when we were doing scenes with him. You know, Ralph was very interesting in that way, and yet we never once had a conversation about acting or much of anything.
Yeah.
If we were in the kitchen, and we were all hanging around the kitchen table and we were being forced to stay there while they lit and keep the energy up. He was wonderfully entertaining, but as soon as we'd break and let's relight or whatever, he would sort of be gone.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so I felt like I never really had much of a conversation with him just as a person, which is kind of odd. I never just sat in a chair next to him and had a whole conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I don't remember that happening as much with him as with other people, right?
Yeah.
Like it's totally possible that I might sit next to Richard and have a whole conversation about a book I was reading, or that I'd be sitting next to Michael and have a whole conversation about what her son was doing, or and it wasn't the same with Ralph. And it's not like he was. I actually think, I think it's somebody's wedding. I don't remember whose wedding it was. There was because Ralph has, I think, been up to speak at more than one of our weddings. But he got up and he talked about, how normal it is for actors to come together and form very tight relationships and then separate and never see each other again. Like that's normal for actors. He says, you get together, you do the work, and then you leave and you're on to something else. And he said, but standing up here and looking down into the, the church and seeing, Judy and Mary and Eric, he goes like, I feel this connection. Like he sort of articulating, like, I feel way more connected to these people than I would expect to feel because of the length of time we were together and the way we worked together. It was interesting for me because it had never occurred to me that the normal thing would be to not have those close relationships.
Mm. Yeah. And yet I wouldn't say that I ever didn't feel close to Ralph. I just respected that it seemed between shots when we dispersed that he wanted, whether he was prepping, or finding his next reality, authenticity for, his character or what it was. I just got the sense that I needed to respect that he wasn't looking. He didn't sit in a chair making himself available like, oh, I'm here to somebody sit and chat with me. It was kind of like, I think we granted that to each other. We didn't push into each other's space if you got the sense that somebody wanted, didn't want to. And I think he and Michael sometimes would, go off and talk or whatever, or maybe he did with, Will or Ellen or Richard or something, or he just went to his dressing room and had his own quiet time. It's
a really good observation you make, because from my point of view as a kid, I didn't understand, like it would never have occurred to me that Ralph is pulling himself off because he's preparing for his next scene, right? Because I really perceived it as such a uncomplicated activity, right? Because I was acting as a kid. And I think if you told like 11-year-old me, like, you have to leave Ralph alone, he's preparing for his next scene, I would have thought, oh, get over yourself. Oh, for goodness sakes. So I think, that plays into it too. And I suspect now that as you talk about this idea, that I probably annoyed him a few times by ignoring whatever vibe he was sending off and trying to like insert myself into a conversation with him as a little kid and being maybe gently and politely redirected, which I don't remember, but it sounds possible, doesn't it? Ralph was also a political creature, right? Like he went on to run for office. And so he had a real social justice mission that was baked into his approach to life.
Yeah. And with his background as having, been an ordained minister, which I think comes from a similar place of wanting to care for people and potentially those in need.
I think it informs the characterization, like he wants it to be realistic because there's that idea of really doing honor and respecting the lives of working people.
Yeah, I think it's a good point.
Like in the same way that Will's work is informed by his political activities in his youth and his traveling and seeing like the hardship that working people were enduring during the Depression and wanting to portray it accurately and to to paint a picture of it that was respectful.
Yeah. But I mean, I was really happy that in later years that I had an opportunity to be, at least when we were, together or ran across each other more, feel closer to him. After sometime after the show ended, you talked about Mary, me, and Leslie. Yeah, we went to lunch with him, and that was when he told us about, how the show sort of, he got sober because of the show, because of the cast. He told us that story, which he has shared multiple times, which, I had no idea. Yeah, I was 14. I didn't, yeah. And I wasn't used to being around people who drank, so I didn't recognize any of those cues, certainly not with him, and certainly not with Michael. So that, that he shared that meant a lot to me. And then were you at the dinner at Michael's house?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the last time I saw him, and and that he took the time to want to connect with each of us as he went around the circle and asked us how we really us, how are you doing?
How are you doing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was remarkable.
Yeah. And then knowing that it wasn't that long after that, it just felt really profound.
Yeah,
that it really was kind of a check-in.
Total check-in.
As someone who had embodied that role of our paternal figure for those years, that there was a piece of that felt like it came from there.
Yeah.
That there was that connection.
It felt that way. Totally felt that way. And I think we all noticed it. Like it wasn't like, oh, something happened and later we looked back on it. It was like in the room at the time. It was like, oh, he's not just saying, well, how are you? He's saying, how are you? Like, are things okay? Are you situated? Is your life where you want it to be? It felt very serious. And very, There was one episode where Elizabeth has to dance with John, right? Like she's going off to a dance and he says, may I have this dance? And it turned out that Ralph was a really good dancer.
Oh.
And I don't think I'd ever danced with anybody who could seriously waltz. And it was this kind of remarkable experience for me. And then when the scene ended, Michael was like in a puddle of full tears on the couch because I guess her dad would dance with her that way. So it was just this beautiful. There really were so many beautiful scenes. And though I know he was, he spoke openly with us in later years about when he stopped drinking, and Michael has talked about her own decision to stop drinking, but there was never a time on set where one was like cognizant that anybody was impaired or hungover in a way that would get in the way of their work. Like everybody worked beautifully all the time. And I feel like Ralph got sober relatively early.
Yeah.
Right? Because he talks about some sort of aha when he had with the raccoon scene where John is giving this long speech to Elizabeth about death and life and this dead raccoon. And Ralph he said it at the 40th anniversary that he realized I have to get my life in order because I'm supposed to be doing this with my kids and I'm not in the way I want to be doing. And
I think it was probably a combination of things because he talked with us at that lunch about, being at the kitchen table and looking at all of us and having, a bit of an epiphany moment there about all of us kind of looking at him as these characters, like that's our dad, and him thinking, I am such a fake. It's like, I'm not, this is like, and feeling that he needed to live up to that, just quite something that, that the combination of how the show impacted him and each of us in very, I think, deep and meaningful ways. And, we certainly hear that from our viewers, how the show has touched and impacted their lives, and the number of people I hear who say that, when men who say, yeah, in terms of parenting or situations, I go, what would John Walton do?
Mm.
Thank you for joining me for this birthday celebration for Ralph Waite. If you enjoy these segments, do please hit like and subscribe. And I will see you next time for more behind the scenes of the Waltons, more Ask Judy, and more surprise guests. Thanks for watching.